Please bring your Class 1 OPBs to the show ring. Your Class 1 OPBs to the show ring.
Good evening and welcome to the 76th Eddy County Fair. Tonight for our swine show, our judge is Mr. Dan Lane from Elkader, Iowa. Dan has too many credentials for me to mention, but a couple of them. He's judged the World Pork Expo, Houston Livestock Show, San Antonio Livestock Show, Oklahoma Youth Expo, and a ton of state fairs. One of the most qualified judges in the country. And now Dan works for JBS and Northeast Iowa Community College, and we are extremely grateful that he traveled down here to sort our swine today all the way from Iowa. So let's give him another round of applause. Start this swine show.
Please bring your Class 2 OPBs to the wash rack. All Class 2 OPBs to the wash rack.
Certainly my pleasure to have made the trip down and get out of Iowa for a little bit and be with you today. I think we got a really good set of OPB barrows to start. I think you got to land on this pair of Chester barrows to lead and drive off. I like the young ladies barrow to win the class, and I think if you study that one, that's the really stout featured, wide constructed, good designed one that's still very flexible in the way that he comes and goes. Got a big forelimb. Really, he's got a great shape in through his forelimb. He opens up with shape behind his back. He's squared on his top. He's big out of his rump. I think his advantages over the barrow in two, he's better faced, better headed. I think he's square behind his blade. He's got more muscle. I think he's wider set at his hip, but he's got more dimension from behind. Two is really flexible. That barrow really gets out and goes. I like the way he handles his skeleton. He gets out and moves. That barrow's got muscle, and I'm not going to tell you he doesn't. Is he explosive as that barrel that we drive off with? No. But that's a very fundamental barrel that's square, level, correct, very sound, very good from a design and build standpoint. He just doesn't have the extras that we had in our class winner to drive them all. Really like young man's barrel that drops out next. I think one that, I think if you study the front 2/3 of this barrel, you can get one that has a lot of the extras that we find in our eventual class champion. That's a tall shouldered one that's square in his chest. He's big over his top. He's a barrier that when we get right in behind him, he doesn't want to handle his hind leg quite as well. He wants to push those hocks outside of his body design just a little bit. And so we'd square him up a little bit right there in from behind to make him as good in his skeleton as we find in those two barrels that we drive the class off with. Good job, buddy. We get into the Berkshire hog, and when this one hit the ring, I got kind of excited, honestly. When you get one this good to start the class off with, or you see right away, you know you're going to be in for a good day. That's a really good design, Gil. She's level, she's square, she's correct. I think if you're ringside, you can see maybe not some of the extras that we had in some of the barrels above her, not as stout in her bone work, not as good out of her hip and her hind leg, maybe just a little shorter in her stride from behind, not quite as powerful all the way throughout, but a good build, good design one, I think that has lots of quality also. We get into a pair of spot barrels. I thought this one's just a little stouter and bolder and wider. He's a good design one that's level and square and correct. Maybe just not quite the extras as far as muscle inside this one. Maybe doesn't handle his hip quite as well. And we end with one that maybe just doesn't have quite the power and mass as some of the hogs in the drive. Maybe just a little shorter in his overall construction. Really a good set of barrels. Let's give these young kids a great big round of applause as they work their way back into the park.
First place went to Lauren Henson, Artesia FFA. Second went to James King, Loving FFA. Third went to Mason Golden, Cottonwood 4-H. Fourth went to Swayze Fullmark, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth went to Chloe Jefferson, Blue Jeans and Boots. And sixth went to Jacelyn Lopez, Zia Sharpshooters. Please bring your Class 2 OPBs to the show ring. Class 2 OPBs to the show ring.
Really another outstanding set of hogs to work through, and again, a pair of them that I think you got to get to here in the end. I like the young man's spot gilt to go ahead and win the class, and I think if you study that one and think about what we used to win the first class, there's a lot of similarities in those hogs. That's a stout featured gilt. That one's got shape and muscle. I think her advantages over the spot or the Chester, it's across the ring, better in her way she sets in through her ham loin. When you get on the top side of her skeleton, she's square behind her blade. She's got more muscle and dimension, particularly when you get out into the rear third of her body. She's bolder. Put them both in motion, and you like the way they handle their skeleton. They both use their shoulder and hip correctly. They both use their feet and legs the way they need to. I thought there was just, again, more extras in that spot to go ahead and lead the class off. Like a lot of things about the young lady's Chester barrel. That's a stout featured one that's got a big forelimb, got a good chest, and really square coming right at you. Want to fix him right there in his ham loin junction a little bit. And I thought relative to our eventual class winner, maybe not quite as powerful when he got right into the rear third of his skeleton, not quite as three-dimensional in the way that he's constructed. Got more muscle probably in the one that drops out in third than the one that was right above him. And this one's got shape and power. If you want to just talk about raw shape, this one's really got a good shape in the way he's made. Got a big, thick kind of a stifle inside of him. His problem comes in the way he's constructed out of his hip. Wants to drop his tail set, wants to get underneath himself just a little bit from behind. He's not as stout in his bone work as we had in our two on the front side of that class either, and so we give up some from a design correctness standpoint. Really fresh, very well presented. Young lady does an excellent job, has got that hug spot on from a presentation standpoint today. Go maybe the other direction on this one that's going to come out, maybe not quite as highly presented. Kind of study this one and look through some of that that we've got in him. And that is a stout burly one that's got a big forelimb, and he's shapely when you get on top of him, and he's got a big kind of a rump inside of him. He's a little more jammed together. He gets a little higher in his center. Maybe doesn't get out and travel and use his skeleton quite as well as we find in some of those hogs on the front side of the class. But he's stout, he's wide, he's muscular, and that's where he has the advantage over the white barrel that's going to complete the class. A really good design hog that's level and square and correct. I like the flexibility of this barrel that we use coming out here. He's just one that from a side you like. His shoulder and hip match. He's level. He paints a very good silhouette when you put him in motion. Get into the body and start studying the way he's made in his rib, the shape that he's got his top, and the thickness that he's got in his stifle. He's maybe not quite as powerful in his construction as we had to use on the front side of the class, and so that's what gets him kind of hooked up here today. Really, again, another excellent set of barrows. Let's give our market hogs, let's give our young kids a great big round of applause.
First place went to John King, Country Clovers, tag 405. Second place went to John King, Country Clovers, tag 408. Third went to Grayson Cookendale, Cottonwood 4-H. Fourth went to Stetson Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Fifth went to Abigail Chavez, Loving 4-H. Rack, all your Class 1 Durocs to the wash rack.
If you're ringside, I'd ask you, let's put our hands together, congratulate our finalists here in our OBB division. Really an excellent pair of market hogs here to evaluate Both of them have, just a good kind of a build from the side. Both of them have a good presence in the ring. Both of them are yet wide and bold and stout. There's one of them that's just probably a little bit more EST in every category, a little stouter in its feature, a little bolder in its design. Certainly when you get in behind it, just a little bit wider and bolder in the way he's set through his hip and out into its rump. I gave it away. I gave up the sex. I'd love to put this one on a plane and be taking him to Iowa in 2 weeks. I like the chest. We had in that second, and we talked about the one that's just really good from a build and design standpoint, and young man does a really nice job of getting that one show. He's very comfortable in the way he handles the ring, one that just handles his skeleton very well. Is he as muscular as the spot that we got here that wins the other class? Probably not quite as powerful in his overall construction, not quite as bold, and so for me, the one that probably follows our class winner for our eventual champion from having the extra ESTs as far as squareness and width and mass, still having the right kind of build and design. I like the young man's skill that wins the second class to be our reserve champion.
Your champion OPB went to Lauren Henson from Class 2, and your champion reserve OPB went to John King out of Class 2. Please bring your Class 1 Durocs to the show ring. Class 1 Durocs to the show ring. Please bring your Class 2 Durocs to the wash rack. Class 2 Durocs to the wash rack.
Really an outstanding set of Durocs to sort through, and there's quality all the way down to the fifth place hog here. And I think you got a pair of them that match up extremely well here on the front side. I like the young ladies barrow to win the class. I think if you study that particular barrow, that's the stout-footed, square-built one that's very similar in the kind of design and build that we found in the barrows that we used to kind of, or the market hogs we used to win the OPB division. Tall-shouldered, square-chested, big top, got a big forelimb. He's shapely down his top. He's big out of his rump. He got a nice presence when you get off the side of him from a build and design standpoint. Young man's barrow, I think, represents the same kind of hog that we've got here to win the class, just a smaller version of him. You'd say he's kind of the mini-me to the bigger point. He's bold in his chest. He's big at his hip. He's level. He's square. He's correct. He's flexible in the way he comes and goes. He's maybe not quite as good on his pasterns up front. Maybe not quite as tall-shouldered as we find in our class, but I think very similar squareness, construction, mass, and standpoint. The pair of gilts that kind of come next and kind of pair up just a little bit from a build and design standpoint. They're a little bigger in their skeleton, a little later in their maturity pattern. I think this one's got a tremendous future in front of her. You just talk about side build and design and flexibility, height of shoulder, and one that's really good when you study her up in through her head and neck. That one's got a great build and a great shape about her body, and the way that she's built from a design, or a great look from the side. Shouldn't have said shape about her body, I'm sorry. A great look from the side, and one that just silhouettes extremely well. I think if you're ringside and you study her relative to what we use to drive the class off, you can see she's a little flatter and drier in the way she's constructed at this stage of her life. Maybe not quite as bold, maybe not quite as stout as we've had to use on the front side, but I think it's there. It's just got to. That's extremely well. Got a height to shoulder and hip match well. This one's maybe not as wide coming right at you. Maybe not as good from her blade forward as far as the way she sets up out of her shoulder front end. That would get just a little more what I call stilted or straight up and down the way she's made in her blade. But that one really, shoulder and hip match well. Elevation of front end's really good. Level out of her rump. Her advantage over the barrow that comes next is this simple muscle. That one's bigger top, bigger ended. She's bolder when you get her out of her hip. She's got more muscle when you get it in the rear to her body. If you remember when I started the class, I said there's quality all the way throughout. This one is really good from a body cavity standpoint. We just study the way this barrel is made in the central portion of his body. That is a bold constructed, big ribbed one that's got a great shape in the center portion of his rib. The problem is it comes in a little bit quicker package. He's a little bit more jammed together. He's particularly shorter out of his rump. He's a little shorter faced. And so that comes at a little bit of a cost. And then you get into him and study him. He's not quite as muscular as some of those hogs on the front side. But really appreciate where this one is good. He is really three-dimensional in the center portion of his body. My compliments to the young lady. Let's give him a nice round of applause. Again, another excellent set of market hogs.
First place went to Olivia Jefferson, blue jeans and boots. Second went to James Alexander, loving 4-H. Third went to Clovey Jefferson, blue jeans and boots. Fourth went to Morgan Townsend, Cottonwood 4-H. And fifth went to Cheyenne Quintanilla, loving 4-H. Please bring your Class 2 Durocs to the show ring. Class 2 Durocs to the show ring. Thank you. Please bring your Class 3 Durocs to the wash rack. Class 3 Durocs to the wash rack.
Really another excellent set of Durocs, and I left these three out because I think they're the three that lead the class off, and I think you kind of study and pull these three apart. I like the young lady's gilt to my right here to go ahead and start the class. I think if you study that particular gilt, again, one that's square-chested, one that's shapely over top, big out of her rump, got a great presence, mobile and flexible in the way she comes and goes. That's a big gilt that's got more substance inside of her. She's a little stouter when you get right in the rear third of her body than the young lady in the center who's going to come second. And I think when you study that, again, a gilt that's very similar from a build and design standpoint, one that's got some shape and muscle, and that's probably where they're going to have the advantage over the barrel that's going to come in third. There's just simply more into them. They're square built, they're bolder coming right at us, they're bigger over their top, they're bigger out of their rump. This gilt maybe is not quite as stout, particularly in the rear, on her rear bone work as we find in our class winner. I like the young lady's barrel, and I think one that's got a lot of future to him when they decide to put that one to the gas and ask him to have a little bit more shape and muscularity. It's a barrel that maybe today just doesn't have quite as much right behind his blade. He's not as quite as bold when he get right out into the rear third of his body. His build and design's really good. He's flexible in the way he comes and goes. I think he's got a very good future when he gets to his end point. Young lady's got one that I think has got a great big forelimb and got a huge chest and one that it's got a big, thick kind of a rump. Get in the center portion of this body, and that one probably gives up as much from a muscle standpoint. More nondescript in the way that he's made in his muscle shape. It's a little plainer in his face. He's not as good from a design and build from an extension of front end as we find in those three that we used on the front side of the class. Get into a good job. Get into a really good design kind of a barrel here that drops out next, and one that's shoulder and hip match well. It's got a nice silhouette. Again, one that maybe doesn't have quite as much just shape and muscularity, not quite as much power, but he's flexible. He gets out and moves well. He handles the ring well. I certainly like that about him. Then we end with one that's, again, one that just is a little more nondescript in the way he's constructed, a little plainer in his face and front end. Certainly flexible enough, gets out and handles the ring well. He's got some body and got some center dimension to him as far as his shape of rib, and certainly like that about him. But again, just give up that true shape, raw power and muscularity that we had on the front side of the class. Again, really a good set of Durocs. Let's give him a great big round of applause.
First place went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Second went to Addison Fulmar, Artesia FFA. Third went to Jacelyn Lopez, Zia Sharpshooters. Fourth went to Michaela Jefferson, Blue Jeans and Boots. Fifth went to Jason Barnes, Country Clovers. And sixth went to Ariana Carrasco, Loving 4-H. Please bring Class 3 Durocs to the show ring. Class 3 Durocs to the show ring.
Getting to our last class of Durox, again, lots of quality to talk about, lots of things to talk about. I think there's one that just probably kind of blankets the class and puts it all together. I like the young lady here in the red shirts bearer to win the class, and I think you study that one similar to what we've been talking about. That's the good built, good design one that's square and bold in the way he's constructed. He's big over his top, he's big out of his rump. Most importantly, and the reason why he wins the class is he's flexible. He gets out and handles the ring. He's sound in his structural, the makeup. He's powerful. He's got enough muscle, got enough dimension. He's flexible enough the way that he comes and goes. I think that's that puts all those things together. Young man's got another one that, again, one that's flexible enough in the way that she comes and goes. Does she have as much mass and dimension? Does she have as much body dimension as our class winner? No, and so that's what gets her hooked up. But one that's sound enough in the way she comes and goes. She's got some stoutness of structure. She's got some bigness of blade, and she's got some forelimb. It's kind of pick your poison from that point down, and you can align these three however you want. You just got to choose kind of what you're going to settle into and what you're going to give up. I like this one. I think she comes the most correct out of her hip and hind leg. She's got the most flexibility of structural design of the three that remain. She's uses her step the best. Certainly one that's got muscularity. She's got shape. She's got turn to her rib, and she's got some center body. I surely would like to have seen this gilt before she blew up on her hock, because I think that one could have been pretty awfully good. I think, but wants to get outside of herself just a little bit, and you can see it's a little kind of uses her hock just outside of her body. Same for the young lady's gilt that's going to complete the class. Certainly one that would love to have seen when she was before those things kind of blew up on her. But she wants to get outside of her skeleton just a little bit on both sides. But that is a stout, structured, wide-chested, big top gilt that's got shape and muscle. She just can't handle her hind leg squat as well as we needed to. Again, another outstanding set of market hogs. Let's give our young exhibitors here a great big round of applause.
Please bring your Class 1 Hampshires to the wash rack. Class 1 Hampshires to the wash rack. Your Class 3 Durox, first place went to Zaylin Aragon, Loving 4H. Second went to Garrett Wages, Loving 4H. Third went to Alyssa Aragon, Loving 4H. Fourth went to Madeline Clark, Carlsbad FFA. And fifth went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA.
Really had a very strong Duroc division. And again, if you're ringside, I'd ask you, let's put your hands together and congratulate each of our finalists here in our Duroc division. My congratulations to these three young ladies. Really a good division. I think as you study them, again, a lot of similarities inside of them. But again, there's one of them that's probably just a nickel bolder and wider, and yet just a little better faced and headed. One that from a build and design standpoint is a little bit more attractive when you get off the side, and just got a little bit better silhouette from a design and build standpoint. And then you compound that with the fact it's simply got more muscle and more width and more dimension. I like the young ladies gilt in front of me to be our champion in this division. ran in the second from that class, and we talked about that pair of gilts in class kind of fitting together and having a similar kind of build and design, similar kind of just muscle and dimension. Our eventual champion being just a little stouter and just a little bit more muscularity. I think when you get back in here and you kind of evaluate that one relative to the drive, I think you really got to keep that pair together. I like the young lady's second in that class to be our reserve champion.
Your champion Duroc went to Haley King from Class 2, and your reserve champion Duroc went to Addison Fulmar, also out of Class 2. Please bring your Class 1 Hampshires to the show ring. Class 1 Hampshires to the show ring. Class 2 Hampshires to the wash rack. Class 2 Hampshires to the wash rack.
Just really another excellent set of market hogs to work through as we get into our Hampshire division. As I expected it, the quality just continues to roll out of the barn. I like the young lady's pig to my left here to be our class winner. I think if you study that one, that's the one that really fills the design and build that we've been using. That's the stout featured, wide constructed one. That's level, square, correct, and flexible in the way that she comes and goes. Got a great presence when you get off the side of her. She's not as maybe big in the center portion of her body. I read that she's gonna get there. She's got shape in her ribs. She's got shape in the center portion of her body. She's not as physically mature maybe as some of those, but just study the angles and the lines, the flexibility that one's got, the shape she's got up over the top side of her skeleton, the muscle that she's got going away from you. And then you study the bottom side and you realize the top and bottom match. That one's gonna be really good when she fleshes up and comes into herself down the road. It gets a little closer for me in this pair of them. I like the young lady to my right to be second in class. I think there's simply more power inside of that gilt. That's a bolder constructed, bigger topped one that's simply got more shape inside of her. She's bigger out of her hip and got more muscle from behind. I love the length of side of this barrel just a little better maybe than what our second place hog is, and maybe just a little better out of it. The hog that was right above it. We fix this one's hock and hind leg just a little bit. There's one that I could get really excited about. Big chested, big tops, got shape. He's certainly one that's extended up into the front side of his body. He wants to push outside of himself just a little bit. What I mean by that is when his feet hit the ground, his hock is physically outside of his body. And so that from a long-term standpoint, from a propagation sign and build standpoint, we need to keep them inside of themselves and make sure that their skeleton can work and do everything that they need to. Give up just a little bit from a shape and muscle standpoint, from just a body width and body cavity standpoint, and the young man's pig that comes next. But a good design, good built one that's got some flexibility, gets out and handles the ring, I think, extremely well. And we kind of change gears and we get into some more moderate framed ones. They're maybe just a little quicker in their build, a little shorter in their face, and just a little bit more mature in the way that they're constructed. This barrel has certainly got some flexibility of design and gets out and handles the ring well. He's just a little shorter faced, a little plainer faced in the way that he's made up in through his front end. But that one's got shape, got muscle, and he's got dimension. I like that about him. Told the young lady the same thing, just gets a little quicker in his overall build, or her overall build. It's a little shorter made, a little shorter out of her rump. It's a little bit more jammed. Gets out and handles the ring well. We got one here that blew up a hock, and in that our Duroc division, that's a good kind of a pig that's got a good chest and good shape up over his top, and he's one that's got some shape through his rib and body. We just maybe change his physical build just a little bit in the way that he's made from a skeleton standpoint. Another, again, really good set. Let's give those kids a great big round of applause.
First place went to Cheyenne Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Second went to Jaylee England, Cottonwood 4-H. Third went to Sam Ballard, Loving 4-H. No, third went to Jacelyn Lopez, Zia Sharpshooters. Fourth went to Elizabeth Nailing, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth went to Sam Ballard, Loving 4-H. Sixth went to Jackson Kidd, Country Clovers. And seventh went to Monica Watts, Harlan FFA. Ladies, bring your Class 2 Hampshires to the show ring. Class 2 Hampshires to the show ring. Please bring your Class 3 Hampshires to the wash rack. Class 3 Hampshires to the wash rack.
awesome set of Hampshires to work through here. And they can land at these three here, and you start kind of pulling them apart and thinking about which ones kind of put all the pieces apart together. When you do that, I like the young lady's skill to go ahead and win the class. If you study that one again, drove the longest of the drive. That's the stout again, honorable one that's got a presence, got a great head and neck, and got a good look when you get runs out of the body cavity. Got good when she comes right at you. Hip and on her hind leg as far as just your mass and squareness from behind. I think the closer decision comes here in 2 and 3. I think if you study that pair of them, I think there's a lot of similarities and then there's quite a bit of differences. Both of them, again, have a nice look from the side. Both of them have a good kind of a ring presence. Got some neat pieces in part. I think when you can ask them things right at you and really study their genuine body build and study them right at the base of their chest and the way that they're shaped. Left's got the barrel that's just a little bit better from a natural body build and squareness and muscularity. He's a stouter bladed one that's boldered his chest. He's better when you get on the top side of his cavity, and that matches better at his rib and down into the lower portion of his body. That one really comes good up in through his chest hole. Big out of his top, big out of his rump. Got a good, again, another good presence. I like that about him really well. Young lady's got one when he hit the ring. I thought here's the one we're gonna tie to. I thought that was the one to win the class, and he's one that you really like. When you get off the side of him, shoulder and hip match as well. Young lady does an absolutely great job of driving the wheels off of him. Get in and start kind of pulling on that one and studying his pieces and parts. That's the driest in his forerib. He's the hardest at the top side of his skeleton. He's not as genuine when you get into the center portion of his body. He gets a little flatter in the way he's constructed. But that is a cool built one from the side. That is stout. It is bone work. He's flexible in his design. And again, I think the young lady does a heck of a job getting him driven. Really a good shaped one that comes next. As far as his body dimension, this is one that when you talk about just general body build, I like a lot of. He's a stout structured one that's got a big rib. He's got great shape when you get on the top side of his skeleton. He's big out of his rump. He's sound and flexible. What's his issue? He's plain headed. He's a little coarser and plainer up in through his front end. He does not have the presence that we had in those front 3 hogs that we started off the class with, and so that's where he gets hooked up just a little bit. Then we get into some pigs that we're going to do some got some differences inside of them. This one gets a little rounder in his build or her build, and maybe pushes outside of herself a little bit from behind. Doesn't handle her skeleton quite as well. Wants to get a little higher in her center and get a little drier in through her forerib. But that one's got muscle. She's got shape when you get on top of her. She's got muscle when you get in behind her. That's where she's got an advantage. Comes next. Young lady's got a level square or a level correct one that comes out next, and certainly one that's flexible in the way that she comes and goes. I thought relative to the drive, this is where we maybe gave up some from a muscularity standpoint. She's not as good right behind her blade. She's not as dimensional when you get in the center portion of her body as far as her shape down her top. She's not as big. Higher in the way he's made. He doesn't have as much his shape and dimension inside of him. He's not as bold on the top side of his cavity, and certainly doesn't have that width down low. But certainly, again, one that from a build and design you like pretty well. We get into a young man's barrel here that's going to drop out next, and one that has some pieces that are pretty good. I mean, that's a big-legged one. That's. Go ahead, young man. That's a. Go. That's a big-legged one that's got a huge forelimb and really got some shape when you get on the top side of her. Again, I think if you're ringside, you can see she's a little drier in her build. She's one that maybe doesn't handle her hind leg quite as well as we find. Young lady's got a good design one from a height to shoulder and length to side standpoint. But again, we give up some from a natural width and muscularity standpoint, just not as bold and wide all the way throughout. Again, an excellent set of Hampshires. I would ask you, put your hands together. Let's congratulate each of those exhibitors.
First place went to Kaylee King, Loving FFA. Second went to Cheyenne Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Third went to Addison Tarvin, Country Clovers. Fourth went to Chance Bowens, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth went to Jonah Pope, Country Clovers. Sixth went to Zaylin Aragon, Loving 4-H. Seventh went to Danica Jo Rose, Loving 4-H. Eighth went to Kaden Golden, Artesia FFA. And ninth went to Michaela Jefferson, Blue Jeans and Boots. Please bring your Class 3 Hampshires to the show ring. 3 Hampshires to the show ring.
really nice. The quality just keeps coming out of the back of that barn. I don't know how you guys and gals do it, but you just keep reloading them, and it's just awesome set to work through. Even better young people. I like the young ladies guild here to my right to win the class. I think study that one relative to the drive and think about what we've used in the Hampshire division. That's the stout featured, good design, good built one. That is the biggest ended one, and yet really has a great presence. Got a big forelimb, got a big rump, really flexible in the way that she comes and goes. I think if you study her relative to the drive, she's better out of her hip and hind leg than the barrel that comes here. She's for sure more secure out of her hock in the way that she uses her hock and her hind limb. She's better in the way that she's set into that portion of her body. She's better in her face and her front end than the barrel that comes here to my left. And so to me, that's the one that logically wins the drive. I think the close pair is right here. This is really the close pair for me. And I think if you study that pair, they're hugs that got some muscularity in them. They're hugs that have some center body and some mass. I think the young lady's barrel, he's got a little more elevation up front end. He's a little better in through his head neck. He's a little bigger right at the top of his hip, and he's more secure out of his hock and on his hind leg. I think the young man's got one that's probably got a little more shape of his body. He's got a little more depth in his flank, and he's got just a little more center body shape than the young lady's barrel. But he's a little plainer in his face and head, and he's not as secure out of his hock and on his hind too as we find in the young lady's barrel. So that's the give and take inside of them. I like to use the design and build and the look of the barrel that closely matches our class winner. This one will be second. This one will be third. We got a really good kind of a sound, flexible kind of a barrel here that's good from a skeleton standpoint. Good job, young man. Good from a skeleton standpoint. He's a barrel that you get out and put him in motion. He's got some flexibility in his feet and legs. I think if you study him relative to the hugs that we've used up the drive, we give up quite a bit from a shape and muscularity standpoint. That's the flattest stifled. He funnels the most in his ham, and he's the barrel that probably has the least shape coming right out of the backside of his shoulder. I just admire that one from his flexibility, his stoutness of bone, his depth of rib, and his heart and the way he's deep in through his forerib. We just simply didn't have the power to run with the barrels on the front side of his class. Good job, young lady. Getting a barrel here that's just quite a bit different in his build. That's a big topped one that's a little bigger in his frame. He's a barrel that maybe wants to get just a little higher in his spine, and a barrel that wants to maybe just be a little harsher in the way that he's constructed. We'd soften that one up, give him more shape of rib, and drop his flank and make him just balance a little better. Then we can get just a little more fired up about him. But he's just a little hard and harsh in the center portion of his body. Young man's got one that's a little, probably a little bolder in the center portion of his body, but one that just maybe doesn't have quite as much shape and muscularity. He's a barrel that is just a little plainer over his top, a little out of his rump. He's probably got a little more depth of rib than the barrel above him, but nowhere near the shape and muscularity we had on the front side of the class. Into a kind of a plain-headed one here that's just a little rounder in his build, and one that maybe just doesn't have quite as much shape when you get right on the top side of his body cavity. He wants to be just a little plainer behind his blade, a little more nondescript in his muscle when you get right over the top side of his skeleton. Then we end with one that's probably just, of those, probably the narrowest constructed, but there's a gilt that is long-bodied and level in the way that she's made. She gets a little stilted out of both ends of her cavity and not quite as bold all the way throughout. Again, just an outstanding set of Hampshires. Again, I'd ask you if you're ringside, put your hands together and congratulate those young exhibitors.
First place went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Second went to Addison Fulmar, Artesia FFA. Third went to Trevor Pope, Country Clovers. Fourth went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Fifth went to Trey Tarvin, Loving FFA. Sixth went to Stetson Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. And seventh went to Joshua Nailing, Cottonwood 4-H. And eighth went to Trinley McCullough, Loving 4-H. Please bring your Class 1 Yorkshires to the wash rack. Class 1 Yorkshires to the wash rack. After our Yorkshire classes, we will be taking a 10-minute break.
Those of you ringside, let's put our hands together and congratulate our finalists here in our Hampshire division. Give them a nice round of applause. Really three excellent Hampshires. One that's green and immature, but flexible, stout. This one will be really neat to see in about 30 to 40 days. I think that one could put a lot of pieces together down the road. Really got a great kind of a look. I think relative to the drive today, probably is a little more immature than what we have in the other two gilts out here, but I think has a tremendous future. Study the other two gilts, and there's a lot of similarities. Shoulder and design and hip and flexibility, stoutness of bone work and chest width and just overall body build. I think there's a lot of similarities in those gilts. One of them's probably just a notch stouter in her bone, probably just a notch bolder when you get right into her hip and got just a notch more power all the way throughout. I like the winner of our last class to be our champion out here today. We had in the barrel that was second in that class, and one talked about one that has a similar kind of silhouette and similar kind of a look as we found in our eventual champion, but maybe not as good in the center portion of that one's body, not as bold in his lower portion of his rib and his center body. We get him back out here, and he's one that obviously fits in the drive. I think the one that probably follows our champion as far as build and design, flexibility, I like the middle division gilt to be our reserve champion out here.
Your champion Hampshire went to Haley King out of Class 3, and your reserve Hampshire went to Kaylee King out of Class 2. Please bring your Class 1 Yorks to the show ring. Class 1 Yorks to the show ring. Please bring your Class 2 Yorks to the wash rack. Class 2 Yorks to the wash rack.
Really good set of Yorkshires to get our division started, and I think you land on this pair of them, and again, build and design kind of puts them there, and then start pulling them apart a little bit. I like the young man's barrow to win the class. That's the really good design, really flexible, stout-built one that's tall-shouldered and got a great look. I think his advantage over the gilt comes in his hind leg. He's a little bit more flexible. He's a little stouter in his feature there. He gets out and probably uses that hind leg just a little bit better in the way that he comes and goes. That's a really good bodied one that's got good shape in his rib. He's really good and genuine at the base of his chest, and he works that up in the top side of his cavity, get him off the side, and he balances up very well. Young lady's got one that's probably got more natural shape when you get in the center of its body. He's better behind his blade, and the gilt's got just more turn right there, and probably just a little bigger right there at the top side of her rump. That one probably is just pushing just a little bit right there from behind. He doesn't handle that hind leg quite as well, but one that I like the front 2/3 of exceptionally well. I think bold and wide and muscular and stout. Really got a good shape in her rib and body as well. Got again another one that I like the front 2/3 of really well that comes out next. Wants to push out of her hind leg not quite as good as what we need her to. That one just gets a little rigid right there. But I think that one relative to the other two, there's simply more hog. She's bolder, wider, stouter. She's got more muscle. She's got more dimension. We just need to make her a little bit more flexible in the way that she uses her hind too. Young man's got a good design one that's level over its top, and she's level out of her rump. Not again, maybe gives up some from just a power and mass standpoint. Not as quite as bold, not quite as powerful all the way throughout. And we end with one that's good bodied, really got a good shape in his rib. He's a moderate framed one that's got really good kind of center body shape and dimension, but he's one that probably gives up just from a mass and dimension standpoint quite a bit. He's not as bold behind his blade. He's not as big when you study him out through his rump. Really an excellent set of Yorkshires, a great way to get our division off.
First place went to Stetson Quintanilla, Loving 4-H. Second went to Addison Fulmar, Artesia FFA. Third went to Kaylee King, Loving FFA. Fourth went to Jackson Kidd, Country Clovers. And fifth went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Please bring your Class 2 Yorks to the show ring. Class 2 Yorks to the show ring.
they just keep reloading them, and really another excellent set of market hogs to work with in our Yorkshire division here. I think you get into these three, and they're the three that do that. That being said, there's one of them that kind of blankets it, and I like the Young Ladies Guild here to my left to go ahead and win the class. I think that's the stout, good design, good built, good flexible one that's got a great face and got a great look. That's a good chested one that's shapely over her top and big out of her rump. That uses her hind leg extremely well and got a great presence when you get off the side of it. I think the closer decision comes in 2 and 3, and just hind leg. The bear closest to me's probably got an advantage in hind leg set and the way that he uses his hip and hind leg. The young man's guilt on the other end's probably got an advantage in just natural shape, muscularity, look, and balance. And so I think to kind of combine those things with what I use to drive the class off, the logical place to go for me is the young man. We're going to use him to be second, and I think one that's got shape and muscle and got a good chest and good body, got a good look. You'd change that one out of its hip and on its hind leg ever so slightly, and again, that's what we talk about this young lady's bear being just a little bit better. That one's really good out of his hip, but he's a little drier at the top of his shoulder, and he's a little crustier in the way he's made up in through his front end. Get behind his shoulder, he gets flatter and more vertical in his build. Doesn't have that raw shape and dimension. Doesn't have that muscularity that we've got in either of the two pigs that we got on the front side of him. So that's where we get him changed up and hooked. Muscle is not a problem in the one that comes next. This one's probably on the opposite end of the spectrum and's got too much. And by that I mean it makes her look a little rounder in the way that she's made. Study the shape of her shoulder and the shape that she's made out of her rump. It's just so much that it impedes her ability to kind of get out and go and function. She's rounder out of her blade, and that makes her move just a little bit like this instead of using her skeleton the way that she needs to. Then get out of her rump, and that makes her just a little bit more awkward in the way that she moves out of her hip and on her hind leg. There is mass and dimension, there's product inside that one, and I like that about it. You end with one that's really big framed and long bodied, and one that's extra extended in his overall makeup. And happy to be at the fair. Got a good look, and from a design standpoint, I like that about him. He is the driest built of the class. He's the hardest in his rib. He's got behind him. So really a good set of Yorkshires. Again, my congratulations to each of those exhibitors. Let's give both those, all those kids a nice round of applause.
First place went to Addison Tarvin, Country Clovers. Second went to Mason Golding, Cottonwood 4-H. Third went to Madeline Clark, Carlsbad FFA, tag 378. Fourth went to Madeline Clark, tag 377. And fifth went to Ashton Tarvin, Country Clovers.
Again, if you're ringside, let's congratulate our finalists here. Give them a great big round of applause. Again, really a good pair, and both of them, I think, really blanketed their classes, and by that I mean I think they were the ones in each of their classes, and you get them out here, and again, there's some similarities and there's some differences. I think build and design is very similar in them. Their shoulder, their shoulder and hip match. They're flexible in the way they come and go. They've got a good look when presence when you get off the side of them. I think there's one of them when you get on the top side of its cavity is a lot better from a shape and muscularity standpoint. Shape's better behind its blade. Get in the center portion of its body. Simply turns more dimension right there. Get out over its hip, and it's probably a little bolder, particularly right at the top side of its hip. I like the young lady's gilt that wins the second class to be our champion. we had in our second from that class. I talked about that one having some uniqueness as far as its length of body or its design and its extension, be good up in through his front end, but not as good out of its rump and not as good on its hip and hind leg. And so when you get him back out of here, there's one that I think fits our champion, I think, extremely well. Not as raw and powerful, not as muscular, but I think every bit as good from a design and build standpoint. I like the young man's barrel that wins the first class direction.
Thank you. Addison Tarvin was your champion Yorkshire, and Stetson Quintanilla was your reserve Yorkshire. Please bring all your Class 1 crosses to the wash rack. All Class 1 crosses to the wash rack. We will take a quick 10-minute break here in the show ring. A 10-minute break. Class 1 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 1 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 1 crosses to the show ring. Class 1 crosses to the show ring. Please bring your Class 2 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 2 crossbreeds to the wash rack.
Really good set of crosses to get with, and a few more in the classes, and so I settled these three down. I didn't need them to keep driving the whole time, so I wanted to kind of give them a little break until we come back to them and get them figured out while I got the bottom side of that class figured out, and then I got back to them and started looking at these three to kind of pull them apart. I think when you pull them apart and you kind of evaluate those three, there's one of them that kind of settles between the two and is the one that logically wins the class. I like the young lady's black-headed barrow to go ahead and win the drive. And I think if you study that hog, that's the stout featured, good built one that's flexible. I think he's got shape, he's got muscle, he's got look, he's got balance. I think his hind leg advantage is where he kind of beats the barrow that's going to come into. He's got a longer stride, he's more secure in that stride. He's got just a great build and a great look, and I just think does a lot of good things. I like the front 2/3 of the blue hog that comes next. I think that one's got a neat look. He's tall shouldered, he's good looking, square behind his blade, and he's got shape when he get out over his rump. If you're ringside, you can see he doesn't reach quite as well from behind. He doesn't reach and handle that hind leg quite as well. He's inside of himself, and so I tolerated that just a little bit. Bold, wide, stout, muscular. I like that about him. A little quicker sided, particularly shorter rumped one comes next. He's a little plainer in the lower third of his body cavity, I guess, just a little bit. I'd lengthen that one's rump just a little bit. I make him just a little bolder when he got right in behind him. Again, love the front 2/3 of that one. Chest width, blade, forearm, squareness over his top, bigness of center. This one's going to be neat to see down the road. I think that one, if he catches a gear and goes up, I think he could be awfully good, hard to turn somewhere down the road. We get into one that I grabbed the young lady and I said, listen, I like a lot of things about this bear. I think that's a square-chested, big top, tall shouldered, good-looking one. It's got a great build from the side, big stifle, really got shape and muscle, and really got a good shape to his rib. Get into the rear third of this one, and that's where we get in trouble. Wants to let his hocks get outside of himself, wants to bow in his hock, actually out of both hocks. And so we need to really just reconstruct that hock from there down, put that hock into him right, and there's one that really runs with our black-headed barrow to be on the top end of the class. There's a lot of quality in that one. Just need to really fix those hocks out of it. Young man's got a big-chested, big-topped one that's got muscle. It's a little plainer face. He's a little rounder, what I call it. His shoulder gets a little closer, set in his knee, gets just a little rounder in his overall build. He's certainly got muscle, got dimension. I like that about him. Certainly got just shape. We want to just loosen him in his skeleton, lay him a little differently out of his hip, but certainly one that's very, very powerful, and I like that about him. Now, Eddy's got one that's just a little plainer face, a little lower set to the ground, a little shorter up in through her front end. We elevate that one shoulder, extend her up in through her front end. Certainly, when you get behind that one's shoulder, she's got some muscle shape down her top. She's got some depth in her heart, some depth in her rib, got some stoutness of feature and some bone work, and I certainly like those things about her. Change gears just a little bit. We get into a bigger framed one that's longer body, more extended, and it's got a kind of a neat look from shoulder to hip. Certainly you can see that one probably just doesn't have as much true spread, as much openness, as much muscularity as we find in those hogs that we use on the front side of the class. And so we just need to offer that one more natural turn, more natural muscle if we're going to get her up any higher in the class. Get one that's just a little flatter footed, particularly on both ends of his skeleton, her skeleton. We need to just raise that one in its pasterns, raise that one in its ankles just a little bit to make that one just truly sounder in the way that he comes and goes. Then we have a really good design one that's level, square, and correct. Gets out and handles the ring well. Good job, bud. Gets out and handles the ring well, very flexible the way that he comes and goes. Just probably doesn't have quite as much muscle as the hogs that we used above him in class. Again, a really excellent set of crossroads to get off. Let's give him a great big round of applause.
First place went to Swayze Fulmar, Cottonwood 4-H. Second went to Lauren Henson, Artesia FFA. Third went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Fourth went to Ashton Tarvin, Country Clovers. Fifth went to Jaden Tuff Malden, Cottonwood 4-H. Sixth went to Abigail Marshall, Loving 4-H. Seventh went to Morgan Townsend, Cottonwood 4-H. Eighth went to Miles Klein, Blue Jeans and Boots. And ninth went to Sam Ballard, Loving 4-H. Please bring your Class 2 crosses to the show ring. Class 2 crosses to the show ring. Class 3 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 3 crossbreeds to the wash rack.
Again, another excellent set to sort through, and I think you got to land on these three on the front side of the class and then sort in on them. And I think when you do that, the young man to my left's got our class winner. And again, that's the good design, good skeleton one, and I've talked about that seems like every time, but I think you can just focus on that, just build and design, and yet then get into them and start pulling them apart and start thinking about how they're built from the ground up and then from there back. That's the one that's good from the side and bold in its chest and big over its top and big out of its rump, and yet got a good presence and a good look. Where does he have an advantage over the other two? Relative to the young lady's barrel, there's simply more muscle in that gilt. She's bigger behind her blade. She's got more squareness when you get right in behind her. She's bolder when you get in there, third of her body. Relative to the young man's gilt, she's simply better on her hind two. She handles her hock and hind leg better. This one wants the bow outside of her hock just a little bit and maybe doesn't handle her hind leg quite as well. So that's what makes her, to me, the logical class winner. I think it's really close between this pair. I think both of them have a good kind of a ring presence and both of them have a good kind of a look. I like the extra soundness of the young lady's barrow across the way, and we're going to make that one second in class. I think that one's got enough just mass and stoutness and bonework and got enough just got enough product to go ahead and do that. So he'll be second, and we'll follow with the young man's. He's got one that has got some really unique pieces. This might be the biggest legged pig that we've seen so far in the show. That one has got a huge shoulder, got a huge foot, got a huge forelimb. That one's got a great big kind of a just a huge kind of a blade, and the way that he's made up in that portion of his body. You can see that it doesn't hook up quite right from behind. It's a little drier and harder in the center portion of his body. There's muscle in that hog. He's got shape. He's got dimension. We just need to fix the way he comes and goes. but there's some very unique pieces to that one. The lady's got a plainer built one that's lower fronted, and just a little rounder in his overall construction. One that maybe is just a little plainer in the way that he's made all the way throughout. Certainly one that's sound and flexible, certainly one that's got some body dimension. Get into a young man's one here that, again, is a little plainer in his build, not quite as much muscle inside of that one. It's a little flatter in his stifle, not as bold when you get right into the rear third of his body. Then we have with one that's just a little, what I would call past his prime, or a little bit more mature in the way that he's made. And by that I mean, you study him at the top of his shoulder, his chine bone's coming out of there. He gets a little rounder when you study him out of his rump, and maybe doesn't handle his hind leg, and then just a little plainer in the way that he's constructed all the way throughout. And so that just kind of gets him looked up here in the drive. Another excellent set. Let's give our young exhibitors here another great big round of applause.
First place went to James King, Loving FFA. Second went to Maddie Cooksey, Loving FFA. Third went to Trey Tarvin, Loving FFA. Fourth went to Addison Tarvin, Country Clovers. Fifth went to Danica Joe Rose, Loving 4-H. Sixth went to Chance Bowens, Cottonwood 4-H. And seventh went to Samuel Fodge, Cottonwood 4-H. Please bring your Class 3 crossbreeds to the show ring. Class 3 crossbreeds to the show ring. Class 4 crossbreeds to the wash rack. Class 4 crossbreeds to the wash rack.
put it up another crank, and we get into, as we get them just a little bigger, we start to see kind of them in their mature clothes and kind of what they can do. And I think you got to get to this pair of them, and then there's one of them I like quite a bit in the pair. And I like this young lady's Blue Barrel right here to win the class. I think that's an awful good one. I think just proportions and balance and build and muscle and squareness and dimension, that one just has a lot of quality in his body and his the way he's shaped, the muscularity he's got, the look and the balance, the flexibility. I just think he does lots of very, very good things. He's better out of his hip and on his hind leg than our second place gilt. He just uses that hind leg, plants and goes. I think he's just a little bit more flexible. Gives up some of the mass. That is a big top, big-ended one with lots and lots of power and product. I like that about that gilt. He gets a little tighter right there on our heel. We find in our eventual class winner, that's two extra high-quality ones right here on the front side. The young lady gets into one that really signals that these next two are kind of a pair, and they get just a little rounder in their overall makeup. By that I mean they got so much that it pushes their skeleton just a little bit, get a little rounder in the way they're constructed. This one gets a little higher in his center. He doesn't have that levelness and flexibility that we have. This one, again, maybe doesn't handle quite as well, wants to kind of throw her leg and doesn't do that quite as well. Gets a little rounder out of her shoulder, and so that's where we kind of get these two. They're just a little bit too much in the way they're made to proportion and balance, like we find particularly in that barrel that drives the class off with. Got a good design, fun colored one that comes next, really level, square and level in the way that he's made. Gets a little plainer in his design. He's a little throatier in the way that he's made, not as bold right behind his blade, certainly not as muscular when he get coming down the top side of his skeleton as we find in those hugs on the front side. Put a different left hind leg in this one. Good job, bud. Put a different left hind leg in this one, and then we move this one up just a slot, probably a slot or two. That's a good silhouetted one that's got shape when you get behind him. He's got muscle when you get on the top side of him. He wants to kind of throw that left hind leg and not use it quite like we'd like to. And that's what gets him in trouble today. Front third of this one's really neat. That's a tall shouldered one that shapes probably as raw and hard behind his shoulder as any of them. It gets a little stilted right there up out of his front end. Gets a little stilted out of his hind too. We need to make him just a little bit more flexible in the way that he comes and goes. There's simply more muscle in him than the young man's blue gilt here that completes the class. A good design gilt that simply just doesn't have as much muscle, much shape, much as dimension as some of those hogs that we used on the front side of the class. Really, again, an excellent set of crossbreds. Let's give our young exhibitors here another great big round of applause.
First place went to Jaylee England, Cottonwood 4-H. Second went to Haley King, Loving FFA. Third went to Kaylee King, Loving FFA. Fourth went to Jaden Tuff Malding, Cottonwood 4-H. Fifth went to Matthew Nayland, Cottonwood 4-H. Sixth went to Swayze Fulmar, Cottonwood 4-H. Seventh went to Gracie Cookingdahl, Cottonwood 4-H. And eighth went to High Chadwick, Loving 4-H. Please bring your Class 4 crosses to the show ring. Class 4 crosses to the show ring. Please bring all your first and second crossbreeds to the wash rack. All your first and second place crossbreeds to the wash rack.
So we get into our last class here at Crosses. Again, just outstanding set to get through. It's been my pleasure to sort through them today. And I think you got to get to these three. And then when you study these three, there's one of them I think separates herself. I like the young man's belted gilt straight in front of me to win the class. Again, that's a good bodied, square built one that's got a great look from the side. She's the squarest behind her blade and comes to us with the most shape when you get into the rear third of her skeleton. Get off the side of her, she's got great wing presence, used her hind leg well. I think she's the one that just combines balance and look and proportion with the right kind of skeleton, the right kind of build. I like the predominantly black gilt to come second. Just one that's got just lots of dimension, lots of muscle, lots of product and power. Maybe just a little flatter footed than we deem ideal, but one that's just bold and wide and powerful and's got a good enough look from a balance standpoint. I think her advantage over the blue one comes in the way she reaches and uses her hind leg, her length of rump, and the way that she's made in the rear third of her body. She's just a little better from that perspective. The front 2/3 of this one are very, very neat. That's a tall-shouldered one that's got shape behind his blade. He's got muscle and got dimension. His hind leg is one that I just can't read quite right, and the way that he uses that just a little bit, wants to be a little closer stepping and then come out just a little bit, and maybe he doesn't have that length of rump, and the way that he sits right in there from behind, I don't get a good read on how that one uses that and flexes that, and that's certainly where we set about changing that one from that perspective. Young lady's got a good built one that's got a good look in the front. Again, front 2/3 of I like really well. Want to clean this one's hocks just a little bit, and again, hind leg we'd maybe make him reach and go just a little bit better from behind, but a good bodied one that's good built from the side. I like that one's design very well. Get a little rounder shouldered one that gets a little, again, one that we talked about, some of those in that last class, they get just a little too much, and they get just rounder and bolder in the way they're made. They don't balance in proportion quite as well. This one's probably got just a little finer feature as far as its bone work, and so when you get that round build and then maybe don't have quite as big a feet, then things don't kind of balance all the way that you'd like them to. But that one's got some muscle, got some dimension, and I like that about that hog. Certainly got some product to work with from that perspective. The predominantly black hog or solid black hog is one that got a big chest floor. He's really wide at the base of his chest, and that comes at some expense, and then he gets outside of himself up front, gets what we call bulldog shouldered, and that opens him up in the way he's made, makes him higher in his center, pushes him under himself from behind. He doesn't level out and go quite as well as we'd like him to, and it all starts in the way that he's made up into his front end, because it changes the way he's constructed from that point back. Young lady's got a level design one here that's simply just a little drier in his makeup, a little showing his maturity a little more. You can see his chine bone comes out of the top side of his shoulder, get on the middle of his body. He dries up some in his muscularity. He doesn't have the shape and dimension that we had. Then the hogs above him, and then we end with a good design one that's level and correct and flexible in the way that he comes and goes, but just needs a shot of raw power. Congratulations, those exhibitors. Let's give them again a great big round of applause.
First place went to Caden Golden, Artesia FFA. Second went to Madeline Clark, Carlsbad FFA. Third went to Lauren Henson, Artesia FFA. Fourth went to Trinley McCullough, Loving 4-H. Fifth went to Garrett Wages, Loving 4-H. Sixth went to Ariana Carrasco, Loving 4-H. Seventh went to Autumn Nayland, Artesia FFA. And eighth went to High Chadwick, Loving 4-H.
One last time, if you're ringside, let's congratulate each of our finalists here in our crossbred division. Again, 4 outstanding class winners here to vie for champion, and each one of them, I think, represents their class extremely well. this one's awfully good. Proportions and balance, flexibility, design and look, and just shape and muscle, stoutness of feature, hind leg use, and just balance and overall just build and design. I think this one just puts all the pieces and parts together and has a great kind of just proportions, and I think it's awfully good. I like the young lady's blue barrel right here to be our champion in the constable. We had in that second, and we talked about that one just having so much raw mass and power and muscularity, but maybe not using our hind leg quite as well as we like. One that maybe just stretch a little differently from behind. There's another one that I thought when he hit the class was the awfully good one, and I think really good. May not be the biggest one out here, but I think again proportions and balance and look, muscle and design, and putting everything together. Where when you think about his size and his build, I think everything fits together. I like the black-headed bear to be a reserve champion out here.
Your champion cross went to Jaylee England, Class 3, and your reserve went to Swayze Fulmar, Class 1. Please start bringing your champion and reserve breeds to the wash rack. Your champion and reserve breeds to the wash rack. Your reserve OPB was John King out of Class 2. Your reserve Duroc went to Addison Fulmar out of Class 2. Your reserve Hamp went to Kaylee King out of Class 2. Your reserve York went to Stetson Quintanilla. I didn't write it, it's okay. And your reserve cross went to Swayze Fulmar out of Class 1. Your grand OPB went to Lauren Henson out of Class 1. Your grand Duroc went to Haley King out of Class 2. Your grand Hamp went to Haley King out of Class 3. Your grand York went to Addison Tarvin out of Class 2. And your grand cross went to Jaylee England out of Class 3.
If you're ringside, I'd ask you to put your hands together. Let's congratulate each of our finalists in our champion drive. Certainly my pleasure to made the trip down from Iowa and get away for a little bit and work with your young people. I can tell you this, you've got a tremendous set of young people, an even better set of, when you think about judging hogs and all that stuff, you got an even better set of young people. And just been an awesome group to work with, and lots and lots of interaction with them, and they're all been very positive. They all, whether they got first or eighth or whatever, they all accepted it well and represented you well, and they do a great job of representing the people that you are. And it's been an awesome set of hugs to work through. I'm not much for speeches, and so that's about as much as I'm going to say. I think we really have lots and lots of quality. I think there's one of them that just mowed me down when he stepped out of the box. I mean, balance and look and proportions and squareness and muscularity, flexibility, and the way he uses his hind leg. I like the Blue Cross to be our champion overall. We had in that second and one that I liked awfully well, and again one that balances and has got a good look and got just a good overall perspective, and one that I see him on the upside. I think that one's going to be awfully good as we get moving on down the road. I think he just puts lots and lots of quality together. There's another one that honestly in his division just mowed me down when he hit the ring. I thought his proportions, his balance were every bit as good. I thought he was so square and so flexible and yet so muscular and so good. And for his breed, I think this one is awfully good. I like the Chester to be our result champion.
Your grand champion pig went to Jaylee England, Class 3 Cross, and your reserve champion pig went to Lauren Henson, your Chester. If we could give one more big round of applause to the judge for coming out to Eddy County tonight.